Talk, talking crime, cases, and backing the blue. Now, here are your hosts, Captain Ed Mamet and Detective Kevin Schroeder.
Welcome, WABC Cop Talk listeners and YouTube viewers. Here we are again with another session of Cop Talk. And I'm the host today because I'm usually the co-host, but Kevin is somewhere in the world, who knows where. So I'm filling in for Kevin as the host. And with me as the co-host is a retired New York City Police Department Sergeant, Rory Capra. Rory Capra will play the role that I usually play. Say hello, Rory.
Thank you, Captain Ed. It's a pleasure to be here filling in for Kevin Schroeder, as always.
Today's guest is a former U.S. Marshal. He headed a task force for marshals and other units. His name is Lenny DePaul, and we're going to have him tell you all about the Marshal Service and his distinguished career. Say hello to the audience, Lenny.
Well, hello, audience, and Captain, Sergeant. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I'm going to let Rory introduce Lenny because Rory knows him, and I'm going to give Rory a little play. Go ahead, Rory.
Thank you, Captain. Lenny, it's an honor to have you here and to be sitting with you. For those out there in the listening audience that don't know, Lenny DePaul was a retired, or is now a retired chief investigator and former commander of the Fugitive Task Force for the United States Marshal Service. He's had an amazing career over the last 30 years. He started out as a young man in the U.S. Navy. After that, he began his law enforcement career on the uniform side, I believe, of the United States Secret Service. That was while serving under the Reagan administration. From there, he moved into what was to become his legendary career in the U.S. Marshal Service. He became a legend then in his own right, chasing down high-profile criminals, drug dealers, and even terrorists. From there, as if that wasn't enough, he also then ventured into a television and I think a movie career around 2008, correct?
Correct.
With television series such as Manhunter, the Fugitive Task Force. I think it was America's Greatest Prison Breaks.
I did that, Hunting Hitler, a variety of different shows.
That one, by the way, was one of my personal favorites, Captain Ed. I don't know if you've ever seen any of these, but Hunting Hitler was fantastic.
Well, being Jewish, I'll have to I'll have to view it.
So we'll put that as a teaser to some of the listeners. They got to go out there and look for these shows because I believe they were all on A&E Network, and they're still available today. So
why don't we let Lenny tell his story? Lenny,
yeah, absolutely.
Tell us where you grew up, where you were born, what schooling you did,
Sure.
and how you got started into law enforcement.
Yeah, well, no, thanks again for having me on. I appreciate it. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, Utica, New York. Have you ever heard of that?
Oh, sure, I've heard of it.
Yep. And I actually lived with my grandmother. We had a two-story house that we lived in. I slept on a couch for a few years. I still got the spring marks on my back, but sadly, she died in my arms. I was about 15 years old, so I was kind of lost. I mean, I was in high school. I loved playing football. I was looking at a football career. Couldn't afford to go to college, so I actually enlisted in the United States Navy at 17 years old. That's where I spent the next 5 years of my life in the Navy on the West Coast. I was stationed overseas for about a year and a half in the Philippines and the Far East. I got out of there as a petty officer second class, and I'll never forget it. I had my sea bag over my shoulder. I was walking down the pier when I was honorably discharged, and I turned around and I said, well, that was fun. Now what? I had no idea where I was going. So I ended up back in New York. Some of my family was actually in the harness horse business, so I shoveled manure for a living for a little while. Ended up in the state of Maryland, worked for a construction company. One day I was out there doing a roof and siding on this gentleman's house, and we hit it off. He was from Brooklyn, New York. His name was Danny Cecere. So I said, what do you do for a living? He said, well, I'm an instructor at the Secret Service Academy. I said, what's that? I had no idea. He said, he went on to explain what the agency does and whatnot. He says, you should apply for a job. I said, well, Danny, I'm an uneducated military guy. I couldn't afford to go to college, let alone pay attention. So he said, well, the uniform division of the Secret Service was hiring. Don't need a degree. Not one of their prerequisites as a special agent, as you're well aware. So I applied. It was about a year or so. I got a call in the office where I was working, and it was the Secret Service. And she said, I got good news and I got bad news. It was on a Thursday. I said, okay, I'm excited to hear from you. What's the good news? She said, well, the good news is you got the job. I said, well, what could the bad news be? She said, the bad news is you start Monday. So I was like, okay, I'm good. Where do I go? So there I was. That was my law enforcement career, kicked off with the United States Secret Service. I went down to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Georgia for several weeks, back up to Beltsville, Maryland, where the Secret Service Academy is, and wound up my first 2.5 years at the White House with President Ronald Reagan. So it was pretty interesting from there on out, him being a Hollywood president, and I would always put in for overtime because of the people that he would invite for the state dinners at night for the state arrival was who's who in Hollywood. I mean, I would actually put in for overtime to work the events at night so I can meet Frank Sinatra and Clint Eastwood and a laundry list of folks from show business that would show up at the event. So.
They offer you any role in the movie?
No, not then. I did meet Sylvester Stallone, who I was a big fan of the Rocky movies back then, but there's some great stories I could tell. I don't want to bore everybody to death, but
well, tell us one. Tell us a good story.
Let me think of one. Edith Bunker, if you remember her, I was a huge All in the Family fan. So anyways, I'm working at night. I forget who the head of state was. And I was in the East Colonnade where they come through the metal detectors and whatnot. And when those folks, even though from Hollywood, when they were at the White House, they kind of checked their egos at the door. They were in a whole different, environment. So, and I got along with a lot of them. So I was sitting at the end of the East Colonnade before they walked into the mansion and the state dining room, and I looked up, and there's Gene Stapleton from All in the Family. Mm-hmm. And I didn't miss an episode. So she gets up to me, and I have to direct her into the state dining room, and I said, I can't let you go any further, Miss Stapleton. She says, why not? I said, well, you have to step back, and I want you to yell, hey, Archie, at the top of your lungs before you walk into the – so she looked at me. She didn't know whether I was serious. I said, no. I said, I'm sorry. She goes – she took it, and she, at the top, it echoed through the East Colonnade. I was at the radios going, what's going on? It was the funniest thing. But I'm in the stories. There was one guy, I'll give it away, it was a guy, that had a family pass to get into the White House. And he was a very good friend of Nancy Reagan, the First Lady. And Maureen Reagan, she stayed in the Lincoln bedroom, one of the family members. But nobody else had a family pass to get into the White House. Can you guess who that was? One person. He was a singer.
Frank Sinatra.
Yeah.
Blue Eyes. That was him.
Blue Eyes. There you go.
Big fan of Mrs. Reagan. He would come and go all the time, so it was an honor to meet. But you would meet all kinds of those types of celebrities with President Reagan. And he had such an aura about him. I don't care if it was Gandhi back then, Margaret Thatcher, Gorbachev, whoever. He glowed. I mean, when he walked into a room, he had that presence. Yeah. And real quick, funny story. One night, a state arrival comes in. I forget who it was. But the state dinner is 7 o'clock, clockwork, elevator. Rawhide was his code name. So I get over the radio, Rawhide's coming down. I was at the elevator in the kitchen where he comes in the back way and then walks into the state dining room. So the elevator opens up. Ray Shattuck was a special agent in charge, always with Mr. Reagan, President Reagan at the time. Elevator opens up. There's Ray. There's the President of the United States. I'm standing there. He gives a little nod. Good evening, sir, whatever I said. Ray, how you doing? He turns to Ray. He wore 2 hearing aids. He took both of his hearing aids out, handed them to him, winked at me, and walked into the party. He didn't want to hear a word. Whoever, I don't want to give up who that was, but whoever had to state that way. And I watched him all night. He could have gave away the candy store. He was yesing, laughing, had a good old time. But such a gentleman, very personable. In the middle of the Iran-Contra hearings, hey, what's the score of the Baltimore game? He was that type of
If you enjoyed the job so much, why did you leave?
I'll tell you why I left. Great question, Captain. I worked protection. I left the White House, went to foreign missions, working on a degree, and I had some former colleagues. I was at a retirement party, and they had left the agency and said, hey, you got to come over to the U.S. Marshals. And I said, what's that? Again, I had no idea. And they explained that we're into the fugitive business now because the U.S. Marshals, they do a variety of law enforcement. They're judicial protection, transporting prisoners, the witness protection program. It's a big thing under the Department of Justice, the U.S. Marshals. And the investigative operations division where I was, chasing human beings across the globe for a living, I was interested in that. So I said, well, will it get me back to New York? And, they said, well, you got to apply. And back then, once you were in the government, it was pretty easy to do a lateral transfer. Mm-hmm. It was an interview process. I had to apply, which I did. I was interviewed in about, 5-6 months. I got a call. We can get you into the Eastern New York, Brooklyn office with the U.S. Marshals. Do you want the job? Home run. I got back to New York, and then it was all up. Well, I don't want to say all downhills, a little uphills, but it was all fun at that point. So I got back to Brooklyn.
This National Foster Care Month, Marine Toys for Tots is providing hope to children who need it most. Staff Sergeant James Caldwell, who grew up in foster care himself, shares that while handing out gifts at a Toys for Tots distribution event, a little girl looked up at him, reached into her bag, pulled out a stuffed animal and said, "Someone needs to make sure you get a toy too." That simple gesture embodies the heart of Marine Toys for Tots, ensuring every child, including those in foster care, experiences the kindness that can transform their future. Visit toysfortots.org today.
Americans love using their credit cards, the most secure and hassle-free way to pay. But D.C. politicians want to change that with the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill. This bill lets corporate megastores pick how your credit card is processed, allowing them to use untested payment networks that jeopardize your data security and rewards. Corporate megastores will make more money, and you pay the price. Tell Congress to guard your card, because Americans lose when politicians choose. Learn more at guardyourcard.com.
So the U.S. Marshal Service, for the listeners, it's not just about civil process, or there's no civil process. It's actually a full law enforcement organization, obviously, and it's now what is it? Is it regional? Is it national? What are some of the duties that you would do as a U.S. Marshal?
Sure. I mean, the U.S. Marshal Service comes out of the Department of Justice at the FBI, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF. DEA, and the U.S. Marshals. Those are the four main investigative agencies within the Department of Justice. They're a federal agency. They're federal marshals. They're not. I mean, we get mistaken for, you're a city marshal. You're going to put a boot on my car. You're going to evict us.
Yeah.
No, we're federal marshals.
Yeah,
we're not. So as a United States Marshal, I mean, they're kind of unique in the way that. When I was with the Secret Service, my credentials read, protection of the President of the United States, blah blah blah. U.S. Marshals credentials read to enforce all laws of the United States of America. So it's a unique agency. What I did, I mean, I was one of the lucky ones. When I got back to New York with the U.S. Marshals, you kind of got to rotate through different divisions, and they do a variety of law enforcement, judicial protection. They're protecting the Supreme Court justices right now. Transporting prisoners. You go to court. You're back and forth to the Bureau, to different Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York or Brooklyn, whatever. You've got the asset seizure program, because we seize all assets from the government. So DEA makes a big bust. You got a yacht, you got a whatever. So we control that. The witness protection program. You got the Mickey Featherstones of the world and those type of people that were part of the program back then, still are. So I would rotate through each of those. And then the fugitive apprehension program, the warrant squads, which I became very familiar with because I did about a year rotating. And then I was permanently assigned to the Brooklyn, New York Warrant Squad, and I never looked back. 3 decades I chased violent felony fugitives, as you said, terrorists, murderers, rapists, arsonists, gun runners, the worst of the worst. So post 9/11, Congress felt it necessary that the U.S. Marshals stand up permanent fugitive task forces throughout the country. So the New York, New Jersey Regional Fugitive Task Force, where I was the commander, was the flagship, or the model, if you will. And their specific language in Congress was to target the most dangerous violent felony fugitives. And they listed them, just like I did, terrorist murders. They also, they wanted us to focus on, our own backyards. The FBI focusing on domestic terrorism, and rightfully so back then. People were getting away with murder. I mean, I hate to say it that way. But so my task force here in New York, largest of its kind in the world still today, 360 full-time investigators,
wow.
Over 90 different federal, state, local agencies, and each one of these, we're averaging 100 to 125 arrests a week just in my region alone. Every one of them averaging 4 to 6 prior arrests. These are some bad people. And one other quick statistic about the U.S. Marshals, they arrest anywhere from 70 to 100,000 fugitives a year in this country. Every year. I mean, it's amazing.
That's collectively throughout the Marshal Service.
Throughout the Marshal Service and our state and local partners on these task forces. The regional fugitive task forces now, there's 8 of them throughout the country. So Makes it tough to go on the run, Captain. And I always say you can run, but you can't hide. And when you run, you only go to jail tired.
You know, one of our former police commissioners, Howard Safer, came from the Marshal Service. Did you work with him?
100%. I was with him right before he passed away. He was sitting on the board with me with the U.S. Marshals. Finally have a museum in Fort Smith, Arkansas. So we went out for the ribbon cutting ceremony, and I actually spent the day with him. We had dinner at night. And what a great man. I mean, he was very good for our agency. He came from the DEA as well, Drug Enforcement Agency, who was with them. But he was a forward thinker, one of the best in the business, and we were very happy to have him with us. But what a great man.
Well, Lenny, as you may know, like the under, I guess it was Commissioner Ray Kelly, the police department expanded its role by having liaisons going to foreign countries. Does the Marshal Service go to now other countries and in service of our nation?
We do. We're on the ground in several vulnerable countries, Mexico City, obviously others around the globe, which, like I said, it makes life on the run very difficult anymore. Wow. I mean, the men and women that are downrange doing God's work, as I say, chasing these violent predators, I salute them every day. I mean, it's a tough climate now. It was when I was in. I remember back in, I want to say 2013, we set a record that nobody likes setting. We had more task force officers killed in the line of duty than in our 220-something years existence back then. So it was horrible. So I was a huge proponent of training. We trained all the time, tactical entries, close quarter combat, all kinds of self-defense kind of things to de-escalate and whatnot. We incorporated all types of equipment to our federal, state and local partners, ballistic shields, whatever was needed to keep these folks safe, because it's a tough job.
How many marshals do we have, like, across the country?
That's the sad news. There's only about 4,000 U.S. Marshals as opposed to 25,000 FBI agents. Yeah, small unit. I mean, our state and local partners, we deputize them as U.S. Marshals, giving them the same authority that I have, jumping on airplanes, crossing state lines. When you're chasing a human being, their human instincts turn into animal instincts. They're on the run. They go dark. They're off the grid. So you got to prepare everybody. So yeah, they're deputized. But to include them, there's about 4,000 actual U.S. Marshals in the department. I always said we're the redheaded stepchild in the Department of Justice. We do more with less, and we're very successful.
Did the Marshal Service interact with ICE, originally called INS,
right.
Immigration and Naturalization Service?
Oh, 100%. We had, when I was there, I think about 15 ICE agents on my task force, always going after illegal reentries, and in fact nowadays with the border czar, who I know, I'm kind of helping out a little bit with their what they're trying to do and implementing these task forces throughout the country to try to clean up some vulnerable areas, if you will.
Well, whose responsibility is it? If you have an illegal here and he's in the wind, is it the Marshal Service to find them or the ICE to find them?
Well, our task forces are combined of federal, state, and local agencies, all doing the same work. Everyone. What's nice about this force multiplier? Everybody brings something to the table. New York State parole. Oh, yeah, was this guy on parole? Yes, he was. Give me what you got. Department of Corrections. Was he locked up? Yeah. Who visited him while he was in jail? Whatever. So everybody brings, something to the table when you're chasing. ICE, with their, illegal reentry cases, whatever, depending on who's on that particular ICE agent's team, it could be a New York City police detective, could be a U.S. Marshal, it could be a combination. When that noose starts tightening and they're set up a perimeter and they got an idea that this guy's going to be at the corner of walk and don't walk tomorrow morning, the cavalry will show up. It's an overkill. We like to go in with a force multiplier, a lot of people to effect an arrest. And thank God, like I said earlier, over 100 arrests a week. I mean, put that into perspective. That's a whole lot of people, sure. Just in my region alone, in New York and New Jersey. So the numbers are staggering.
Lenny, you touched on 9/11, which is always close to home for New York City Police and New York City Fire Department. You were, during 9/11, you were an active marshal in New York City. So what part did you and your agency play on that day?
We actually played a pretty big part. My daughter was born September 7th, 4 days before 9/11. So I was actually home. She had just gotten out of the hospital. I was sitting home, and I'll never forget it. The New York Giants were playing the Denver Broncos Monday night. I stayed up, had baby duty, so I stayed up, watched the game. I watched the game. I went to bed late, and I got awoke the following morning with my wife crying, shaking me, and I thought something happened to our daughter. She was 4 days old. And she said, a plane just hit the World Trade Center. I said, what the hell are you waking me up for? I'm exhausted. With that, the TV was turned on, and here comes the second plane. And I'll never forget, I went downstairs, I kissed my daughter on the forehead. I said, I'm sorry for bringing you into this crazy world. I was gone.
Yeah.
We played a big part. Our electronic surveillance units with Taru and those technical operations folks, they were trying to pick up on cell phones that were in the rubble. We were digging out, along with everybody else, obviously. But I kind of zigged when everybody else zagged. I was read on to a military intelligence team back then. And not to get into specifics or details, but I was assisting the military in hunting high-value targets. They picked on one person in the Department of Justice, happened to be me. Wow. So they take me down to D.C. I got read on to this program. Next thing I know, I'm overseas having some fun with some pretty crazy people. It was a combination of the Tier 1 folks, Delta, SEAL Team 6, and so on and so forth. So interesting work. I mean, the military was now in the manhunting business, and, their search and destroy methodology kind of took a step back, and, we got to hunt fugitives now. So I brought that to the table, and I would sit in a secured environment, a SCIF, sure. and discuss things. And, I'm the village idiot, right? We got these brainiacs around the room, and we talking about a specific target, and I would get up there, and they weren't I hate to say this, they weren't sharing the intel that they had, whatever it was, not to get into details. But I would stand up and get on the whiteboard, and I would say, well, wait a minute, you said this, you have this, we got to get together. And they're looking at me like, but it made sense, and they finally kind of brought me on board and said, okay, you're one of us now. And I spent several years with those guys having some fun. But then again, I had a huge task force I had to run as well, so very busy back in those days. 9/11, it was
sure.
horrific. We'll all never forget it. But,
yes. Tell us about the most memorable case you worked on.
Memorable cases, wow. And again, the thousands of arrests I've been involved in. I don't know if you remember the D.C. sniper case, Lee Melville
sure.
and John Muhammad.
Yeah.
So we got sent to Washington, D.C. area for that.
That terrorized the D.C. motorways.
Unbelievable.
Wow. Yeah.
The sniper
sure.
was running rampant. He had killed several people.
Sure.
So I'll never forget driving down there. They say, I got to come down, grab some guys. They need some federal assistance, whatever. So I'm in my car. I'm driving from New York. I get to the state of Maryland. I was running out of gas, so I called the guy, said, I got to pull in and get gas. So as I'm pulling in, there was this woman, I'll never forget it. She's pumping gas. She's literally laying down on behind her car, and I see her head popping up. And I looked at my partner. I said, man, they're taking this pretty serious down there. I didn't know, really, I wasn't too involved with the case. I was paying attention, but not, So I was like, wow, this is crazy. So that was, I think, about day 5. The chief in Maryland had the lead down there, but Chief Moose, I believe his name was.
Yeah.
Yeah, remember Chief Moose? So great guy, but he was overwhelmed. I think they had 5 bodies in Maryland that had been killed by an alleged sniper. But we were very instrumental in getting on to the younger guy, Lee Melville. And it was interesting how it happened, because one day he kept calling. He called the dispatcher and said, if you don't believe I'm one of the snipers, look at the Montgomery killing. And everybody thought it was Montgomery County. It was Montgomery, Alabama. So we get a hold of the chief down, and did you recently have this woman who was killed? Yeah, we did. In fact, it was kind of weird because she was in, I think it was a liquor store. She was coming out, and this car pulls up. A guy jumps out and grabs her and actually killed her, stole her pocketbook. As the PD shows up, he takes off running. A guns and ammo magazine falls out of his pocket. And in that magazine was folded on aim points or scopes. So he said, we're in the process of lifting prints off this magazine. So we're like, time out, hold on, don't touch nothing. So a bunch of folks deployed down there, and sure enough, they pulled the print off, came back to this Lee Melville. So now it was like, who's Lee Melville? So it was about all over but the crying at that point, yeah.
What's interesting about that case is the term person of interest.
Right.
You never heard that before. It was always a suspect.
Yes.
And I remember when Moose would talk about, we have persons of interest. And now that term is used, but it should really be suspect. I mean, you hear in the news, they brought somebody in, he's questioning being he's a person of interest.
Right.
He's actually a suspect.
Right. An alleged suspect.
But that's that case.
That's a kind of gentler term, Captain.
That case created that term.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Because I'm a retired detective, and I heard about what the hell is a person of interest. I never heard that term before. Because a person of interest to me would be maybe a witness or somebody who can contribute to the solution of the case, but not the actual suspect.
Right.
So now you hear suspect, the person of interest. What's what? Who's who?
Well, they had a lot of person of interest that they were popping up down there. They were targeting a white van. I don't know if you remember the case.
I remember the van, yeah.
Yeah, big white van, and they thought they had him one morning. We had the U.S. Marshals had the, how do I say this? We were doing all phone work, let's put it that way. And they were using coin phones a lot, whoever it was, the sniper. And we get an inbound call. I get a call about 6:50 in the morning. I'll never forget it, from the command post. They just got on the phone. They just made a call into us. We're tracking the phone now. So they're trying to lock in on where the outbound call was. So maybe 15 minutes go by. All right, they're at this gas station, and I get the address. I get on the radios. Anybody? Yeah, we're like 5 minutes out. I say, get to the gas station. Go in slow. We've got a pretty good beat on them now. They just made a call. Well, unfortunately, apparently somebody in the command post, I'm not going to give up anybody, heard our folks call me and say, where this call was coming in from. So they deployed a SWAT team. Well, my guys get there. I get a phone call and says, I thought you told us to go in quiet. I said, I did. He goes, it looks like they're filming a movie here. There's a helicopter up. There's people all over the place. They got 2 guys in custody next to a white van, 2 Hispanic guys. And I'm like, what? So long story short, it wasn't. Actually, Lee Melvo and John Mohammed were sitting down the block watching the whole thing. They had made the call. They were sitting in their car, and they got, they had wrong, they had the white van, right? But the 2 guys that were in it, sadly, they were actually illegals. They got locked up and sent back to their country. But it wasn't the DC snipers at that point. So, yeah.
Len, you have a business, tactical uniforms?
Yeah.
Why don't you tell the audience about that?
Yeah, my wife, I retired. My wife is in the fashion business. Ellie, she comes to me one day. She says, why don't we do, COVID showed up. Why don't we start a tactical clothing line, boots, pants, whatever. I said, honey, I'm retired. Well, I lost. So we stood up this company. It's called the letter O Dark 30. In fact, we have a website, odark30.com. And we got off the ground during COVID. We've been up a couple of years now. There's a lot of moving parts to a business I worked for the government for a long time, and not used to standing up a business, but it's off and running. And the website I just said, so interesting. Again, trying to get into police departments and firemen. It's an outdoors kind of apparel, and the boots are great. They did a great job making them. So it's another part of my life that I should be on a golf course in South Florida, golfing and retired, but didn't work out too well.
People are interested. How would they reach you?
It's the website is the letter O, odark30.com. So it's odark30.com.
Lenny, getting back to just the law enforcement side, because I'm fascinated with your career. During your time in dealing with criminals, you also dealt with what I guess we would call celebrity criminals. You've dealt with John Gotti. Oh, yeah. The likes of like Sammy the Bull Gravano and some of the Bonanno family. Can you tell us something about that?
I got pulled off the street during the John Gotti final trial in Brooklyn, New York. The Eastern District had him, 1992, I think. So you had Frank Lucazia, John Gotti, and Sammy Gravano, 3 of them on trial. So my team had the luxury of transporting them from downtown Manhattan, MCC, the Metropolitan Correctional Center, across the Brooklyn Bridge to the federal courthouse every day. Me alone would go up to the 3rd floor at MCC at Dark 30, no pun intended, and there they were, the 3 of them. So I would, good morning. John always had something funny to say. Hey, Lenny, you got change for 100? That's funny, John. He said the same thing yesterday. Yeah. So I'll never forget one day I come in. I got the cavalry downstairs, motorcade ready to go across. I'm upstairs. I walk in. Frankie's there and John. No Sammy. So John's quiet as a church mouse, right? So we get on the elevator, I'm going down to 1, and I turn around, and I'm going to be the funny guy. So I say, hey, John, I said, where's Sammy? What is he, a rat now? I had no idea the night before the
man.
Bureau brought him on board Team USA. If looks could have killed, I'd have been dead on that elevator. And sure enough, the next day, front page of all the papers, Samuel Gravano becomes, cooperated with the government. But fast forward, though, he was, I never had any problems with him. We'd come over the bridge. Hey, let's go down to Italy, have a little lunch. I know somebody down there. All right, John, always, he always had that. But when he was finally convicted, jury came in, found him guilty on everything. He knew he was done, going away for life. So I had to take him up to where our Conair lands, our Boeing 740, our aircraft. So I'm driving him up there, and he's in the back, me and my partner, and he's quiet as can be. So we get to this airland, place where the plane, nondescript area where the plane comes in, and all the other districts are there with their federal prisoners because in our world, they could get, confined wherever in the country. It doesn't have to be like in upstate New York if it's local, whatever. So anyways, he was going to Merriam, Illinois, and he's in the back of the car. He's quiet. We pull in. Other districts are there loading their people on the aircraft. And I said, John, sit still. We'll go last. So I get out. He gets out, and we had him shackled in the front, and he's shaking like this. And his chains were going. He sounded like the ghost of Christmas past. He was just. So I'm thinking he knows it's over. He's going away for the rest of his life. Get up to the foot of the aircraft. I knew the guy on board. Yeah, John Gotti. I hand him medical records, whatever I had. So what do you say to the guy? I'm with him for the past 4 or 5 months on trial. I don't even remember what I said. Hey, have a nice flight, whatever. So he takes about 3 steps off. I walk away. He takes 3 steps up the ladder, and he says, hey, Lenny. I said, yeah, John. He says, you think it's too late to say I'm sorry? That was the last time. You know why he was shaking? Not where he was going. Mm-hmm. He never flew a day in his life. He was scared to death to get on that aircraft, and somebody in his family had told me that. He never flew. He was scared. They always take the train. So he didn't care where the hell he was. But hey, Lenny, you think it's too late to say I'm sorry? That's the last. And then sadly, as you know, he died in prison, throat cancer. Yeah. But yeah, celebrities. I don't know if you want to call them celebrities, but they certainly made the newspapers every day.
Sammy the Bull is still out there somewhere, right?
He's out there somewhere. He was actually in the program, as you can imagine. Then he violated. I think he was in the state of Arizona trying to sell some kind of pills or something, and ended up getting locked up out there. So, yeah, I don't know what his deal is. But I get on the elevator with him at MCC one morning, and John was there, Frank, obviously, and Sammy. And he looks at me and he says, you look like you're tough. You a boxer? I said, no. I said, I'm a lover, Sammy. I'm not a fighter. he's, hey, you look like a boxer, And John's like elbowing him. I'm like, shut up. He's just whatever. Anyways, it is what it is.
So with your company now that you're doing, you say it's all tactical gear, and you're selling, I guess, for police agencies or just across the board. Can anybody buy? They can go on the website. Anybody can buy.
Yes, sir. Anybody can buy. Yeah, okay. Yeah. The boots are great. We got tactical clothing. My wife is looking at a different. It's called the Black Label. She wants to get into, even cigars and things of that nature. So, but it's a slow process. We'll see how it develops. But, like I said, it's keeping me busy. And I'm doing another television show. I got into, back when I was with the U.S. Marshals, I get a call one day. A couple of producers want to talk to you about doing a show. I said, I'm a little busy, guys. We got a brand new task force here. No, this was 2008, I think, or 9. So finally, our public affairs in D.C.'s got to talk to these guys. Bring them in. What a great way to show the American taxpayer on how some of their money's being spent. I said, Don, his name was Don. I said, Don, are you nuts? I said, you have any idea what I'm doing here in New York? We're crazy. I lost. They won. And these producers came in and said, yeah, we got this idea about this TV show, blah, blah, blah. So fast forward, A&E loved the concept, and 3.5 seasons. We shot 64 episodes, I think. It was fun for me because I can yell cut in the middle of a shootout, Captain. It wasn't bad. But I was never home. It was insane. I never knew. But I retired, and since then I've done several television shows, been in a few movies, and, I'm not Sonny Grasso, but I'm having fun in my retirement world.
Well, Lenny, this has been a great interview.
Thank you.
And we're glad to have you, and I hope that your business takes off and that you go on to bigger and better things. And perhaps we'll have you on again. Rory, you want to have something last
Well, I just want to say, Captain Ed always teases me because a lot of times I'm wearing suits. So with your company, if you make some ballistic ties, count me in.
You're the first guy we'll get to. Now, thanks for having me on. I enjoyed myself. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So listeners and viewers, This has been a great interview, and if you want to see it on YouTube, it's on YouTube and most of the social platforms. Thank you again, Lenny.
You're welcome. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Roy.
Hello, folks. Larry Kudlow here. Pay attention, because China is leading the largest anti-American alliance since World War II. One that's already dumped U.S. bonds, grabbed 43 million acres of our farmland, and is plotting to dethrone the dollar. That's why IRA and 401k savers are protecting their savings with gold. Please go to freegoldguide.com/Kudlow or just call 800-621-3908 for your free gold guide on how to protect your wealth with gold 100% tax-free.